Good day, detectives. It's a great day to speak with you in a less formal setting than our other videos, like the Death of a Game series. I was thinking that in my 21 years of playing MMOs and online games, I've had a lot of experiences, but I've only told you about a fraction of them. I wanted to put more effort into videos that were more conversational and address certain issues. What is your favorite MMO or MMORPG class, for example? That's the theme of this video, and why do you choose the class you chose? This may appear to be a simple question, but your choice of character or playstyle in an RPG can reveal a lot about you as a person. I'll share my favorite online RPG classes with you, and you can share yours in the comments below. Before we get started with the rest of the video, detectives, I would like to introduce a sponsor for this video, Ace Defender. Ace Defender is a high-quality single-player RPG that combines a tower defense game, which is my favorite style of mobile game by the way, with a turn-based RPG with over 40+ chapters to play through, as you help Lapita the Silver Dragon Princess defeat the evil that threatens the Dragon Clan. There's 5 different factions to choose from: Divine, Demon, Shadow, Nature, and Light, each with deep hero background stories totaling at 48 heroes with yet more to release. As expected in an RPG, you can level up and equip more powerful gear. The gameplay modes consist of a 1x, 2x, and 4x speed selection with a focus on solo play. You can participate in PvE and play through regions and dungeons, or take your character online to PvP arenas and fight other players. New users who download the game from the link in the description or the pinned comment get 10 Royal Recruit tickets after completing just level 2 to 8. Just go to Sky City, the tavern, and boom, there's your 10 recruit tickets. This is absolutely free, so make sure to use the link for a head start on Ace Defender. And once again, I would like to thank Ace Defender for sponsoring this video. Before I tell you guys some of my favorite classes, I want to quickly explain what I think constitutes a good class to start with, so you understand my choices a bit better. A class, as I mentioned before, in some ways, is about personality or style. As a result, various roles will attract specific types of players. A decent game with good classes will appeal to a large audience that online RPGs attract. Because of this, a well-designed class will not appeal to all types of players, only those who naturally lean towards a particular playstyle, or those select few who choose in the spur of the moment. People often choose a class solely on the basis of its effectiveness as well, termed Flavor of the Month or FOTM. But that's more so on the competitive side, and since we're selecting a variety of classes from other games, it's not as crucial to consider right now. Perhaps it's the mechanics of a class that interest you, perhaps it's the feel of the gameplay, or even the look of the class. Ultimately, there are many things that draw a player to a certain class and constitute a good class to players, but at the core, a good class evokes emotion in the player and allows you to use it as an extension of yourself. The first 2 classes we'll look at are from the same game, Mythic Entertainment's Warhammer Online. But let's start with the first, Squig Herder. Warhammer Online was a PvP-focused realm versus realm game set in the Warhammer fantasy universe that pitted the Order against the Destruction. The Squig Herder was on the side of the Greenskins, who chose to align with the Destruction in this game. The Squig Herder was a bow-wielding ranged class with a pet named a Squig. This pet had multiple skills and could be controlled by the Herder, or like, you. Just like in World of Warcraft, the game Warhammer was based on in many respects. However, the Squig was special in Warhammer since it could devour you if you chose the melee spec under the mastery tree, Path of Stabbin', which awarded you high armor and melee damage. You received different benefits as well from different Squigs. The tree would be redone and renamed to Path of Bouncing in Return of Reckoning, which is a Warhammer Online private server with plenty of new content and a still active enough population, making the spec far more viable. But at the core, the class was a range class, as evidenced by the other 2 mastery pathways, the Snipe spec Path of Great Shooting, and the Run and Gun spec Path of Swift Shooting. Because the Squig Herder was so much personality, it's one of my favorite classes of all time. The Warhammer's franchise Greenskins, whether in 40k or fantasy, are just amusing and offer a new perspective on orcs and goblins. All of this is on full display with the Squig Herder class in Warhammer Online, with abilities like Don't Eat Me for a detaunt, What Blocka for an armor shred, and yep, an ability literally named Bad Gas. There's a lot more incredibly hilarious ability names out there. Those are just a few examples. Because your Squig's propensity to bounce, what's called bouncing in the game, this is kind of my favorite spec. Bouncing would deliver AoE damage to individuals in your immediate vicinity. On top of all of this, you could use your morale abilities like Squig Beast to make yourself ridiculously large while you bounced and did even more damage. While this spec was formerly seen to be a bit of a meme spec, look at it now. As noted previously, it's significantly more relevant as a spec in Return of Reckoning, so if you still would like to attempt to play one of my favorite classes, you still have time. The next class I'm going to talk about from Warhammer Online is the Black Orc class. That's my next favorite class from the same game. And it's amazingly the same group and race with the Orc Brethren this time instead of the Goblins. But no class was more distinct in my opinion other than the Black Orc on the battlefield, who due to their immense stature would actually tower over the other tanks and classes on the battlefield. My first meeting with a Black Orc was one of the Tier 1 battleground situations, and I remember being just astounded by the lad's stature. On the battlefield, their colossal size is impossible to ignore, and with that colossal size comes the usual tank abilities. The Black Orc's class mechanic was based on stances, which was a bit unique, and certain skills required you to be in specific positions. In a way, it's kind of like WoW, except that it was more based on the concept of actually swapping your stances, whereas in WoW it became sort of an unofficial concept. A sword and board or a double-handed axe could be used or played by the Black Orc, and the double-handed axe was the go-to DPS weapon, while the sword and board was of course the tank and spank. For me, the Black Orc was unique because you could actually play sword and board as a DPS spec, with DPS focused talents and gear. So you had a lot more resilience so you didn't die as easily, but you still had true DPS spike threats that could kill healers due to your ability called Shut Your Face, which would silence your victim, and then your ability literally called Tree Hit a Combo, which would deal continuous damage. You could then use a DPS morale like Raise or Demolishing Strike with the game's morale mechanics. The Black Orc was entertaining because, like the Squig Herder and other Warhammer classes, you were a massive death machine who excelled at taking up people's screens and possessing deadly crowd control. Every class in Warhammer seemed unique, but my personal favorites were definitely these two. My next favorite class is from Guild Wars 1, which is one of my all-time favorite online games and probably one of the first I ever played. I played it from the beginning through all of the expansions all the way up through Eye of the North. One of the best aspects of Guild Wars is the game's sheer depth of ability and tactical knowledge. With 10 different class options, there are hundreds of possible combinations. Each build includes its own template code that you could copy and paste in and out of game. So if you don't make your own, this will automatically offer you the build that you want, since you can just go look it up, right? I'm going to focus on the Ranger class. Because of the Ranger's clever ability to stay alive and move rapidly, and the Necro's ability to life drain or vamp from enemy players, the Ranger-Necro combination was one of my favorites in the game. This class was called the Toucher. The principle is, as the name implies, pretty straightforward. You sprint at your target using abilities like Whirling Defense and Dodge to improve movement speed and blocking, and then you spam your Bite and Touch abilities to drain health and damage your opponent. For example, in this build you utilize Offering Blood to regain your energy, so you can then just keep spamming your abilities and basically almost never die. This was a very aggravating build to counter, as you had to basically CC the Toucher in order to kill them. But the number of games when I was outmanned by the opponent and was able to obtain a critical res or morale boost to aid my comrades to get up or kill my enemy is too numerous to count. That made the playstyle in the class so much fun for me. Because I could queue as a single player in random arena and essentially solo queue wreaking havoc. The Toucher build is really hard to deal with simply because of its survivability and its ability to self-heal. The next favorite class that I'd like to mention also comes from Guild Wars. This one's a bit more serious and considered more of a meta class, and other people love this class as well. That's the Mesmer, or specifically the Mesmer with the Backfire ability. The Mesmer was a type of spellcaster that resembled basically an anti-spellcaster. Other spellcasters took harm when they performed their spells because, well, of skills like Backfire. This was a lethal combination when combined with elite skills like Soul Leech or Spiteful Spirit, which had similar concepts but on a larger scale and were usually AoE. So the idea was simple: the Mesmer would hex you, you would cast abilities, and they would damage you. However, the Mesmer could also employ alternative builds, such as the Illusion Magic, which concentrated on delaying and incapacitating your opponents. The playstyle is more close to a traditional Warlock, sort of like the Inspiration Magic, which on the other hand has the ability to drain your opponent's vitality and health. With the counterspell anti-magic angle they excelled in, the Mesmer was an interesting twist on the Warlock class. This made them a lot more fun to play with because you knew that the other mage classes had to respect your abilities, which were kind of designed particularly to give them fits. The The Mesmer would go on to have some of the same origins whenever it would be used again in Guild Wars 2, but I believe it lost a lot of the feel that made it special in Guild Wars 1, though others might say it acquired its own distinctiveness by focusing on other concepts such as clones and detonations. My personal favorite thing about the Mesmer is simply because the anti-magic ability is just unparalleled. That's my segue, by the way, speaking of Guild Wars 2, because yep, you guessed it. My next favorite class is the sequel to Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2, and the favorite class that I'm picking is the Necromancer. Guild Wars 2 shares many core similarities to Guild Wars 1, but abandons the Holy Trinity and has far more of a focus on its fast-paced tap-target hybrid action style. As the first player/team to be sponsored in the game by Team Curse, I feel I can confidently state that Guild Wars 2 has an exceptionally high skill ceiling. Guild Wars 2 does not demand you to have the knowledge and tactical abilities that the franchise is known for typically. It does still have a high skill ceiling, which offers gameplay and speed in combat that encourages twitch reflexes and speed. While some classes focus on catching you with super quick combos and getting out, others focus on killing you with debilitating means through conditions. The Necromancer for this reason is my favorite class in Guild Wars 2. The class that I can't seem to get away from since I loved it in Guild Wars 1, but Guild Wars 2's Necromancer is probably my favorite class ever. There were few players playing the Necromancer competitively when I first started playing Guild Wars 2. I assumed that people just simply didn't grasp the Necromancer, since I had played it heavily in closed beta. In order to back up this claim, I studied Europe's best Necromancer player. On top of that, I spent countless hours practicing the class 1v1 and playing 1,000 games before the game was even released. This is when people were still criticizing the Necromancer and were kind of trending more towards the power or the lich specs of the Necromancer, which wasn't particularly performing as well as the other power classes. On the other hand, the conditions-based Necromancer was the only one I ever had my eyes set on. That's because I knew conditions and boons were a big element of Guild Wars 1, and they would continue to be a big element of Guild Wars 2, and people would be unfamiliar with them. Other than the Minion-Mancer build that created unlimited creatures and would send them at their enemies, I centered my Necromancer build on the conditions, or the Condition-Mancer build as it's now known as, which wasn't particularly unusual, really, but my approach was unique in that it focused on being tough to kill by also highlighting the class's merits. Like most, I was stacking toughness to decrease damage, but where I switched things up was a bit of my trap card. It's the self-healing that the Necro possesses. While others were focusing on health and toughness primarily, I also would focus on the self-healing of the Necromancer. Now for those watching the video right now who probably still play Guild Wars 2 or remember playing it recently, they're like, what? The self-healing on the Necro's crazy, but that's probably because, well, it wasn't as known back then, right? As a Necromancer though, you could drain people's health with a variety of weapons, skills, and their heal would even allow you to employ the conditions you'd put on yourself or steal from enemies to bonus heal per condition. The Shroud, which was a unique feature of the Necromancer, would allow you to drain life, teleport, and fear your opponent, which was a unique Necromancer condition. You set up a number of conditions on your opponent, and then you would hide in your Shroud until your heal was off of cooldown, rinse and repeat as needed. Apply a slew of bleeds, poisons, and chilling effects, and you get the idea. But something that would make the Necromancer in Guild Wars 2 just go to the next level in regards to this is the ability to transfer conditions to and from your opponents and your teammates. In a sense, the Necromancer or the Condition-Mancer build is essentially a Plague Master. If you transfer and set a number of conditions on your adversaries, for example, you could then use another ability called Epidemic, which would allow you to distribute the ailments to other nearby adversaries. This would increase your condition damage and allow you to create essentially living bombs on the enemy team by spreading lethal illnesses to essentially their own teammates on accident. With new expansions and specialist classes, like the Scourge, this spec would only get even better, as the Scourge would bring in even more healing and AoE features. And best of all, it introduced a previously unexplored condition for the Necromancer, Burning, and Burning caused a lot of damage and was difficult to cleanse because it didn't last very long. The ability to corrupt other players' boons and convert these conditions is the final piece of the puzzle for why I adore the Necromancer class in Guild Wars 2, and why it's such a strong class in general. That means you don't have to rely on making the conditions yourself. Instead, you could just use what your opponent already has on them, for example like boons, and turn those into conditions. As you can see, the Necromancer is one of my favorite characters ever. And if you haven't tried it yet, I really recommend trying it in Guild Wars 2, because it's probably the best condition-based class I've ever encountered. So far, we've pretty much covered all of my favorite online games. So if you know me, you know that a Star Wars Galaxy class is pretty much unavoidable, as that's my favorite MMO of all time. Now, my favorite class in Star Wars Galaxies has been my favorite class and profession in Galaxies from the game's beginning. Through pre-CU, the combat upgrade, and the new gaming experience. In every edition of the game, I played the Bounty Hunter, and it was always my favorite class. Bounty Hunter is a character I'd argue that, like other professions in Star Wars Galaxies in general, is incredibly effectively done because they incorporate aspects of their character into the gameplay. The Bounty Hunter is an example of this. As the name implies, you're an actual bounty hunter. As you might assume, that means that bounties could be hunted in Star Wars Galaxies. You would start with the NPC bounties and progress towards the more rare and dangerous player bounties, including the most rare of all and dangerous of all, the Jedi bounties. To accomplish one of these bounties, you're going to need certain skills and class tools. The bounties could be found at various bounty terminals. You could then send a drone to look for your target and report back on its whereabouts. You would begin on a tough mission of bounty hunting against genuine players who had real bounties placed on them by other players. You were going to have to use deception and adequate preparation with gear, boosts, and weaponry. This made playing the Bounty Hunter more than just a class. It was a legitimate job in the game, something WoW has dabbled in before but never to the extent that Star Wars Galaxies did, which included it into the actual class. That's why the Bounty Hunter was one of my favorite classes ever, and one of the classes that I think still stands the test of time. I hope that in the future more MMOs or MMORPGs trend towards making classes more like genuine vocations or money-producing careers. I believe that combining these two crucial factors result in a better and more memorable class experience. I know they resulted in that for myself. Those are some of my favorite online RPG classes. What are some of your favorites? Let me know what you think in the comments below, if any of the classes that I mentioned you also like, or if any of them maybe piqued your interest to go check out. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please like the video and let me know what you'd like me to cover in the next video. In my 21 years of playing these games, I've collected a lot of stories about the secret black market of MMOs, PvP stories, intense role-playing guild stories, and so much more that I can't wait to share in video formats someday. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching, everyone.